Member Committee meets every month via Zoom, and 4 times a year we convene a session like this where we address substantive topics that are of interest to public members, and we hope everybody else in the I.C.E. community, and we invite anyone who wants to join. And sort of a tradition has evolved that our December call is a recap of what some of the things that happened at the I.C.E. exchange. So today we will, various members of the Public Member Committee will give reports on sessions that they attended that they found to be particularly stimulating and interesting. And anybody else who wants, if there's time, anybody else who wants to comment on what they experienced at the exchange, if there's time, we'll certainly open it up to the floor. And as a heads up, as another tradition, the March network call, which is again the second Tuesday of March, same time as this one, will be a presentation by the Schimberg Public Service Award winner, it's going to be Diane Millette, who will speak in behalf of the group that won the award from Canada. I want to also encourage everybody. I don't know how many of you on the call are actually public members and how many of you have public members in your organization, but I want to encourage you to send your public members to the exchange. The I.C.E. incentivizes this by waiving the public member registration fee if they attend with their CEO or their board chair. And at the beginning of the meeting and at the end, the public members have a breakout session. And at the meeting in Miami, we had 14 people attending that breakout session, which is encouraging and good. And now to our reports from the meeting. I'm going to go around and call on members of the Public Member Committee to give a report, and start with Tom Granader. Would you please introduce yourselves before you speak? Tell people who you are. Tom?
Sure. Thanks, Becky. Tom Granader. I am a public member on the board of the American Board of Preventive Medicine, and I'm doing some staff work for the American Board of Medical Specialties, where I worked for 15 years. I retired at the end of last year. Mostly on professionalism, which is a topic I'd love to talk to anybody about. The session I wanted to mention is one that I was really impressed by. I maybe was more enthusiastic than I should have been about it. That is to say, I said it was one of the best I'd ever seen. It was so lucid and well organized, clearly presented, and it was done in a very simple, straightforward way by John Weiner and David Foster. John Weiner, you all know, I'm sure. David, or Weiner, I guess maybe he says, and David Foster, CEO of Cavion, about the future, focus on the future, navigating the next decade in testing. My enthusiasm was probably partly connected to the fact that I kind of agreed with everything they were saying. So it was some confirmation bias there. They talked about the drivers of change and what changes we can expect in the next 10 years, with a focus on both trends in the workplace and the needs of the certification bodies themselves. Trends in the workplace having to do with automation of work, changing expectations of what kinds of skills humans need, and the advancing impact of technology, and in particular generative AI. I've just been in a meeting for the last 2 days in California talking about how generative AI is going to transform medicine. And actually it resonated very well with a lot of the things that came up in this talk. The needs, which were expressed by David Foster, have to do with security and the elimination of systemic error, the elimination of cheating, creating more accessible, efficient, and cost-effective testing, and dealing with issues of equity. So they talked about, they expect a transformation of the testing industry over the next 10 years in how tests are created, what we measure, how they measure, and how they're used. As far as how they're created, they see a transformation across the entire life cycle of test development, from job analysis, blueprinting, item generation, evaluation, calibration of items, evaluation of equity, fairness, and equity issues in scoring. And they foresee, with a priority of eliminating measurement error, developing enormous pools of items that will allow them to do on-the-fly testing and highly personalized testing, with randomization as the solution, basically, to create more personalized tests and more individualized tests, which will eliminate the issue of cheating and security. And this is coming from Cavion, which is a security company. So he's basically saying that a lot of the assumptions that we make today about testing are going to be turned on their heads by the new technologies and the capabilities that they create. In terms of what we test, I think they both agree that we're going to be moving beyond knowledge testing to other skills and 21st century skills, sort of cognitive, creative thinking, synthesis, and critical thinking, but also other kinds of skills, communication skills, team skills, leadership skills, and creativity. And this is going to happen through testing using high fidelity simulation, speech recognition, animation, and multimedia testing. It's going to be highly personalized. It's going to be more generalizable. It's going to be more learning oriented. And it's going to be a low stress event. It's not going to be a high stakes event. It's going to be low stress, ongoing testing embedded in the workplace. And it's going to be used to provide feedback, continuous learning, and it's going to be adaptive to changes in the workplace and changing workplace needs. So in the end, they foresee a much more dynamic, unpredictable kind of test, the virtual elimination of cheating, the introduction of adaptive testing, which will be much more efficient, customized to fit individual needs, linked to learning systems in order to integrate the continuing education system with the testing system, the enhancement of testing to encompass new skills, and there will be remnants of our tests that will remain the same, but the focus will be a little bit different. So MCQs will still exist, but not to assess knowledge, but to assess the application of knowledge and higher order thinking. And tests will be modularized, and AI will help to both to standardize the tests and to integrate and synthesize the results to create comparable and highly generalizable tests. So I was very encouraged by that. They're both thoughtful, enthusiastic about the way technology is going to change the industry, and I think it was a real good. It was and very consistent with the conversations we've had among the public members about the assumptions we make today about how testing has to be done and what certifying bodies have to do, which will be transformed. And 10 years was their time frame, which was, to me, kind of incredible. They say these things are happening so quickly. There were several other sessions at the conference that touched on these themes of moving towards performance measurement and the use of simulation, avatars, gaming, and other sort of technologies for assessing other skills. So we are seeing these things happen already. And I can't wait to hear what the rest of you say about the sessions you went to. So I hope that was enough, Becky.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tom. And I'm going to change the order of presentations that I originally had and turn to what was going to be last, which is a session that I was the moderator of, and Grady Barnhill, who I see on the has arrived on this call, was one of the speakers. And this session was about very similar to what Tom has just described. It was called None of the Above: Pressing the Boundaries of Measuring Knowledge and Searching for the Secrets of Measuring Performance. And the objective of this session, it was about, I think, maybe the fourth year when the program committee accepted a session on assessing the actual performance of certificates as opposed to book learning, on the assumption that public members and the public in general cares about how services are delivered as much as they care about what people know. The panelists were Tim Muckle, who's the Chief Assessment Officer at the National Board of Certification and Recertification of Nurse Anesthetists, where I'm the public member currently. Sarah Schnabel, who is a psychometrician for the American Board of Ophthalmology. Susan Davis Becker, who's a partner in a psychometric research and consultation organization, and Grady Barnhill, who is the head of the International Society for the Advancement of Continuing Competence and a longstanding man about I.C.E. Anyway, again, we talked about what would we want to prioritize in assessment in order to get at the actual performance of certificates. And the consensus seemed to be things like communication and situational judgment and what are often referred to as soft skills, although that's not, doesn't give them the stature that they deserve, these skills. There seemed to be a preference among these experts for assessing core competencies as opposed to those needed for the individual's specialty, although I hear Tom saying differently that the emphasis is going to be on individualizing assessments in the future. And there was a debate over whether to assess the kinds of things that fall under the rubric of professionalism, things like ethics, ethical behavior, and that sort of thing. As to methodologies for assessing performance, we talked about direct observation, revalidation systems that are being used primarily in Canada and England, 360 reviews of people's performance, customer or patient reviews of performance. And absent direct observation, they imagine in the future a greater use of simulation, things like chart reviews, standardized patients, use of oral exams, and even the use of take-home exams in some rare situations. The issues associated with many of these assessment methodologies are the difficulty of standardization, for example, in evaluating oral exams, and the sort of challenge that these new techniques present for the psychometric traditional rules of the road. As to the future, I think there was a general feeling that the use of simulation, which is being used increasingly in training, should also be used. It's very promising for carrying over into assessment, particularly assessing performance. The role of AI is as yet unknown, but it's clearly going to be significant. And there we had an interesting discussion of whether and under what circumstances it's acceptable to relax the traditional strictures of psychometrics, such as standardization, in order to conduct assessments that are meaningful, even though they may not fit the strictures of psychometric tradition. And Grady, would you like to say anything about that? And would you like to say anything about a session that you and I attended, which had to do with the use of AI in assessments? Because I think that also is consistent with the topic we're on right now.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. Yeah, very interesting sessions and a very interesting conference in general. Like Tom, I was very excited about what I was hearing. It's just a very interesting time with particularly AI is just being such a driver of change in our new landscape. I wanted to touch back, I think, on the session. I think Tom and I were both at that future session, which I believe is a session where we heard about things they're going to be teaching and drifting more to competencies than knowledge base as knowledge becomes less important and maybe competencies become more important the more that we have access to computers and AI. The summary I had of what we're going to be teaching is, I like this one, prompt engineering, which you can all identify with. What do you ask AI to give you? And a lot of that is the development of these often very complicated prompts. If you're going to include a sample of a clinical scenario item or what kind of ethics questions you want. A lot of talk about centering on the more information you give AI about what you're trying to achieve, the better it can do at copying that. So I think that prompt engineering is going to be a big thing. Critical evaluation, digital threat assessment, sort of something you might expect to hear from Cavion. What kind of threats to security do we have from the digital world? Adaptability, ethics, leadership, and learning agility, or continuous learning, I think is going to be the name of the game moving forward. I thought it was interesting listening to the discussions about AI, the sessions that Becky and I attended, and others. We've shifted, I noticed, the conversation from not will we use AI in our processes, but now it's how will we use AI in our processes, and a lot of different answers to that. How to set up the guardrails for artificial intelligence. A lot of focus on constraining the data sets that you use to train AI. I think that's kind of important in terms of helping prevent some of those hallucinations that are problematic, and trying to avoid copyright issues. If we can constrain that data set that you use to train AI, that's helpful. It's certainly all still evolving. There were some interesting practical use case sessions that involved item development, and it looks like we obviously are still at the point now where we need humans in the loop and to check on those hallucinations. But in talking about AI, I've started trying to develop the habit of adding the phrase "this week" because it seems like things are happening so fast. I imagine it won't be long before we have AI agents that are going to be pre-testing these items and helping to check for hallucinations and helping to make sure those distractors are reasonable. That's what I was seeing from PSI and some of the other groups, PSI and Prometrics, being the groups that I know have pretty fleshed out AI item development tools. I'm sure others are on the way, will be next week, I'm sure. But it was interesting to hear some of the tensions in the sessions that Becky and I were doing on performance session assessment, that we hear some of the same tensions develop, those around security. What kind of security do you have? And I think it's important for us to remember cheating occurs in many different forms. So sometimes folks will talk about just one kind of cheating, copying. If you have a list of the test questions, do you have a copy of answers in front of you? And I think that's less and less useful as a cheating strategy now. I think what we have to be more concerned with is if you're not doing monitoring of your candidates, how do you know whether or not you have a group of subject matter experts sitting in the room with the person taking the test and knowing whether or not they're getting assistance with these changeable items? It's interesting to hear the suggestion that we'll be moving to simulation testing and a lot more in vivo testing. I like that, and it seems like the fidelity is being dialed up a lot higher. Having been around a while, I think Becky used the word long-standing as introduction, which is a much kinder word than old. But having been around a while, I know we've been predicting for a long time that we're going to really take off into these simulations, and we have these powerful new simulation devices, and it has just not happened in my lifetime so far. We do, a few groups will go out and do some wonderful simulations, and have been doing for some years. The simulation in aviation is just amazing. The plane simulations they use for the pilots. But we're still a long way from having a simulation engine, for example, using one of the DaVita surgery machines. We still don't have exams for the most part using that. We use that a lot in teaching folks. And I think the simulations, the $250,000 dummies that will simulate lots of great things are very useful in education, but haven't found themselves too far in the way of high stakes credential testing. I think for a lot of reasons that the psychometricians get nervous when you have a hard time nailing down criteria and being able to have a standardized administration. So the softer those things get that we're managing and trying to measure leadership, ethics, and that sort of thing, the more difficult it gets to have nice tight criteria that can be standardized. So that's a struggle that we still see. I think in our discussions between Sarah and Tim, it's kind of on the psychometric, more standardized team, and I think I was more open to, shall we say, a softer assessment side, which I think we're sort of trending to. You could see that tension play out. Psychometricians are much happier if they have a nice tight domain. So for example, trends that we've talked about, like having individualized testing, you obviously want to have a core that's being respected. So you're going to have a certain amount of testing that applies to all the credentialed practitioners, but it's become popular to try and let the exam customize itself more to the individual practitioner, which is exciting. But you'll have that tension always between how much of the core do we test versus how much individualization or subspecialization do we allow. So that played out in our session, that whole issue of subspecialty versus specialty versus the general core is still an issue. So lots of things to think about and talk about, but I think I probably should stop talking and let others get a word in. But thank you.
Well, I want to change gears now completely and ask Glenna to talk about DEI sessions and some sessions on the accessibility of credentialing programs. And Brett is going to tell us about the session that addressed public members specifically. And then Mark Bertler, who's the public member on the I.C.E. Board of Directors, is going to talk a little bit about what the I.C.E. board is thinking about in the future. So let me first ask Glenna to speak for a little while.
Hi, I'm Glenna Tinney, and I'm the public member for the National Board for Respiratory Care, but I'm also the liaison from the I.C.E. Public Member Committee to the I.C.E. DEI Committee. So I'm going to start talking about the presentation that was from the DEI Committee that was called DEI Committee Update, What Can My Organization Do Now? The presenters were members of the I.C.E. DEI Committee, Pam Weber from the National Apartment Association Education Institute, Samantha Evans from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and Shital Tiwari from the Council for Homeopathic Certification. And they talked about the survey. It's actually a DEI environmental scan that was conducted in spring of 2023 by I.C.E. It was in the field for 7 weeks, received participation from 86 organizations. And it was really to gain an understanding of the state of DEI practices among credentialing organizations. That report is available to all members of I.C.E. for free. So you can access this report by going onto the website. But the outcome, there were a lot of outcomes that defined benefits and, various challenges that people are having. But what they identified was 4 strategic action domains. The first was comply. And this is where many credentialing organizations currently stand, that they are focused on activities that comply with ADA regulations and standard setting organizations. The second domain is commit. And this is where organizations have at least committed to having a philosophical commitment to DEI. They maybe have a DEI statement, have some goals on DEI in their strategic plans. The third domain is integrate. So this is where you begin to institutionalize all of the different aspects and concepts of DEI and dedicate financial and staff resources to activate DEI objectives. And they begin to weave DEI practices throughout the organization. The fourth action domain is measure and perform. And that obviously is the more mature DEI programs. So they begin to push their work out externally, and they make position statements, have DEI reporting, begin to try to quantify or measure what they're doing. So I wanted to start with that one first, to kind of set the stage. But then I attended on the pre-exchange sessions. It was a 3-hour one on the morning before the exchange started, calling Moving Beyond Having a DEI Statement, Practical Ways to Implement DEI Initiatives Throughout Your Organization. And this was, the presenters for this session were from the National Certifying Body for Physicians Assistants, Don Morton Rijas, who is the CEO of that organization, John Weir, Cindy Knowles, Angela Lenga, and Sheila Maudlin were all part of that. And so, but Julia Judish from the Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman law firm was also part of that presentation, because she was presenting about what are some of the challenges, particularly some of the legal challenges that organizations are facing currently. And I wanted to lead with the DEI report because the physicians assistants group, they really are what I would define as in the third strategic action domain, where they are integrating DEI throughout the organization in many different ways. So they you know, these action domains are not linear, so you don't start with one and then just work your way through them. They really kind of overlap, and people are doing various kind of things in the different domains. In this presentation, the people from the physician's assistant organization, they really laid out what they've been doing over several years, in beginning with, you know, complying, and then moving into making a commitment, and then all the different activities that they are engaged in currently to be moving DEI to be very visible and to be just kind of folded into all that they are doing. So they've gone way beyond just having a DEI statement. You know, they have an internal group that they call, it's named IDEA. And, you know, I didn't write that down, but I think it's inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility is what I recall that stood for. But this is a group that helps ensure that all the activities that they're doing are kind of hitting the mark, you know, doing the things that they want to be doing in order to be visible to their constituents and to all the various stakeholders. They also have reached out trying to establish relationships with the historical Black colleges and universities to try to help the profession to become more diverse. So you know, they're taking on a role of externally showing their commitment through various kind of activities. So I also attended other sessions. There was a session that was really focusing on DEI, looking at differential item functioning analysis, trying to find bias within the individual test items. And this was PSI and people from the Hospice and Palliative Credentialing Center. And, you know, I think it's called DIF. It's a very important concept that I think that we all need to be aware of in our organizations. The organization I'm a public member for are now doing DIF analysis, and I'm currently at a board meeting, and we this morning looked at 5 items that came out that showed up with a DIF analysis, trying to look at those items to see whether they are biased or not. And then there was a session on language, which I thought was going to be about how you accommodate people with language, but it turned out that it was about expanding to have the credential in other countries, and therefore translating the testing into the languages of those countries. And I posed the question, so are you translating the testing into like Spanish, particularly in this country, for people that maybe English is not their first language, but that was not the emphasis of the talk, or it's not really what they're doing currently. And then the last one was about accommodating people with different kinds of needs through digital media. And that was Samantha Evans, who is one of the members of the DEI committee. And she was showing tools for how you can, on your phone and on your computer, just use different tools that are already there to access in different ways, and that how you could, use those, and how your certificates or stakeholders could use some of those. So there were a lot of DEI sessions that were specifically about DEI, but then there were DEI related sessions as well. And so that just gives you a little bit of an overview of the kind of sessions that were there.
Thank you, Glenna. Next, Brett, will you tell us a little bit about the session and where you were a participant, a public member representative? And I see Nancy Alawalia on the call here. She was the inspiration for that session.
Sure, and I'll make sure to leave some room for Nancy to chime in on this as well, because I think ours was a little less structured, I think, than some of these other ones we've heard from in advance. This was mostly a question and answer session. It was there for public members, especially new public members, to come and have a chance to just have an open forum to ask questions of public members. Well, actually, I should say the panel was a mixture of public members and folks who work with them. So we had, like, for example, we had some leaders and like assessment directors and a CEO on the panel. So we had a pretty diverse panel from different perspectives. I should point out, hi everybody, my name is Brett Foley. I'm the public member on the Nebraska Board of Engineers and Architects. And in my day job, I am a psychometrician with the National Board of Examiners in Optometry. So some of the questions that came up were often related to locating public members, identifying somebody to be a public member, and training public members once they were on board and kind of making them feel involved in the process. I think those were kind of like the big areas that came up most often among the questions that we saw in the over the hour. One of the biggest differences that I noted was the issues related to public members varied quite a bit in licensure testing organizations versus voluntary certification programs. And we know that there's some differences there. There's lots of similarities on the assessment side and how they work. But in terms of governance, there's quite a bit difference. And so the role of public member is a little bit different. In both cases, they're representing consumers or the public, but the way they're selected may be quite different. So a lot of times for licensure organizations, those public members are appointed either by a governor or a state legislature or some other governmental entity. And so the board doesn't necessarily have a lot of input on the kind of person that gets appointed. And so there also may also be a lot of need for training for how to be a board member and explaining the role of a public board member to somebody who comes on to a licensure exam when a licensure exam program versus a voluntary certification. And I'll sit back just for 1 second. For those of you, I'm taking it for granted that all of you know the distinctions between a licensure and a certification program. But for those of you who may not, I'll just briefly say a licensure program, a licensure test is something you can't have a job. You can't work in a profession without having this credential, this license. Like you can't drive without a driver's license. You can't, in many states, you can't teach without a teacher's license. You can't work as a physician or a lawyer without having approval of your state licensing board. So that's so it tends to be a minimum competency type exam in terms of you have to be over this bar to be allowed to interact with consumers. A certification exam, in most cases, is a voluntary exam. It's an extra feather in your cap that shows you have some advanced or some additional set of knowledge that other potential maybe employees might not have. There's some gray area between the two of them. Sometimes one functions like the other in certain situations, but that's the general difference. Um, so, like I said, on licensing boards, a lot of times those are appointed rather than selected by the board or the organization themselves. So, but for organizations that are voluntary certifications, where they're kind of self-governing in most cases, they have a lot more flexibility in the choice of public members that they get. And so there was some discussion about what makes a good public member. And in some cases, organizations like, um, especially larger organizations and high profile organizations, may be looking for somebody with lots and lots of board experience. And that was valued by at least the CEO of one of the groups we talked about is the getting kind of a big name in the field that had a lot of respect would be helpful. Where in other cases it was more like we just want somebody who's willing to serve as a voice of a consumer, and really their personal characteristics about being willing, having the confidence to stand up and ask questions was really kind of uh, the kind of primary drivers of the kind of folks we'd want to have involved. Um, I think those were sort of the big things. The question got asked of me, what are sort of the psychometric things that you'd most like to see public members get extra information, extra training, or they or what psychometric elements, parts of the test development process should public members be particularly aware of and interested in and look into? And I suggested, you know, the more the better. Obviously, it's great to have well informed folks across the board, but that's not people's day job to do test development. So of particular importance is job analysis, making sure the content of your exam really is tied to the job, or a competency modeling, or however it's done in an organization, making sure there's a strong mechanism to tie the content of the exam to the job, and also the standard setting process, the formal process of determining the passing standard, the passing score for the exam, because you could have a really awesome exam that's totally perfectly matched to the field, but if you set the cut score in the wrong place, you're still going to be making lots of wrong decisions. And while psychometricians can help you with that, a lot of times it falls to the policy-making body, often a board, often consisting of a public member, to make the final decision on what that standard setting is. And so encouraging public members to reach out and get, if they're not familiar with it, get some additional background about that and the kind of questions to ask when put in the position to perform some of that, those policy judgments and input. So those are some of the highlights that I remember of it. Nancy, did you have other? We had a great panel, and we were worried we wouldn't have enough questions to fill up the hour, and so we had some ones seated throughout the audience. We didn't really have to use those. We had a really engaged crowd that had a lot of good questions. So Nancy, I'll turn it to you.
Well, the only other sort of area of questions were the role of the public member, including can they serve as chairs of committees, officers, including the chairman of the board. And the response was very interesting to me because Everybody that was on the panel said there are no restrictions. But I do know that in other organizations, there definitely is restrictions. So anyway, I thought the answers were really interesting. As Brett said, we had representation of CEOs. Cheryl was also on that panel.
Yes.
And then we had Kevin from the Certified Financial Planners. So and it was a fun session to facilitate, I'll add that.
Thank you. And I don't want to overlook Cheryl, who I missed earlier in our Cheryl Traficano, who is a faithful CEO member of our public member committee and was on the panel. Do you have anything to add?
No, I think it was, I do. I think it was fun, like Nancy said. And I think one of the things I reminded people about is that, you know, public members aren't the only people that really need training about how to function and serve on a board. Board members' certificates do too. So there is, you know, there's, we don't want to, just because someone's a certificate doesn't mean that they're going to be a knowledgeable or good board member without training. Everybody needs that same training.
Good point. Before, and I also want to make you aware, Brett talked about standard setting, and on the public member resource page, which you can find on the I.C.E. webpage by going to communities and then clicking on public members, there are recordings from all of our quarterly sessions like this one. And one of those sessions, Brett delivered a very excellent primer for public members on how to participate in standard setting. And I recommend that. You can find it on the website. Let me turn now to Mark. I think you wanted to talk a little bit about what the I.C.E. board has on its agenda.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. The main thing I'm going to focus on is the credentialing ecosystem. The I.C.E. board just redid its end statements. I'm not going to do an explanation of the Carver model of governance, but basically it requires the board to have end statements that guide the staff activities over the course of the year. This past year, we added an expectation that I.C.E. will serve a convening role in the credentialing ecosystem. And what's interesting, and people who have worked with me know that I love harmonization. So I just came off of a webinar with BoardSource, and BoardSource talks about focusing on the ecosystem that your nonprofit resides in. So there's a lot of discussion, and this is part of their purpose-driven board leadership strategy, which they established a couple of years ago. I'd recommend you go check it out because it helps, I think, give some perspective to the role that a public member plays as well, because one of the things that it addresses is having representatives of the ecosystem that your organization resides in as part of your board. The other thing I just want to mention is one of the political issues that I.C.E. is concerned about in conjunction and really being driven by the American Society of Association Executives is the potential for tax reform in the next Congress. There are rumblings about adding nonprofits to taxable entities in the next tax reform package, because of course, with the incoming president's focus on tariffs and other things that may cause, tariffs and tax reform that shifts resources to the more wealthy members of our country, that there will be gaps in tax revenues. And how will those gaps be filled? And some of the discussion is that will be filled by looking at nonprofits, our reserves, and other components of our finances, and perhaps subjecting them to taxes. So there'll be more to come on that, but that's just a heads up. One of the things in talking about AI, I would recommend that folks read Yuval Noah Harari's book, Nexus. It's a really great study of a couple of things. One is that having more information doesn't bring you closer to the truth. And the second is, as Grady mentioned earlier, you have to ask AI the right questions. Otherwise, horrible things could happen. The last thing I will say is that when it comes to public members, one of the things I recommend is that their board support them in pursuing the credentialing specialist certificate. It provides a really good grounding on the credentialing industry across all aspects. As Brett mentioned, it does delve lightly into psychometrics. It delves into what the responsibilities of a credentialing entity are and how you develop a credential. So I always add that pitch in, and it was something that I think I mentioned at the public member get together as well.
Mark, can you direct us to the webinar that you referred to earlier?
I will post that.
Okay.
It hasn't been, it just happened right before this one. So the slide deck and everything will be available in a week, and I'll just put it out to the group. Also going to share it with the I.C.E. board because it sort of dovetails into a number of the things that we're doing as well.
So Becky, there's a
Yeah.
question in the chat. Would you like me to read it out?
Yes, please.
Okay. So Rebecca Sutter asked if anyone has anyone considered or discussed the idea that AI will disrupt the industry's professions that we credential to the point it will impact what we are testing. In other words, not only AI's impact on organizations, but its impact on the rationale and content of the credentials themselves.
Does anyone want to take that on?
Well, I'll just say in medicine, there's absolutely, that's at the forefront of the conversations we're having about it. If medical knowledge, we know physicians are slow to adopt technologies, but consumers aren't. And we know that there are already a lot of consumers using these tools to get answers. And there's a high likelihood, as the ability of technology increases to provide diagnostic answers to questions that consumers have, that the access to general medical knowledge is going to be, that problem is going to be solved through AI. And then the role of the physician becomes different. And you have to test the skills that are related to the new role, to the role as it's redefined around the coordination of care, the management of a treatment plan, other communication with patients, dealing with difficult ethical issues and that sort of stuff. So we're going to be able to test the more human qualities. And I won't use the term soft skills, Becky. I want to banish that from our vocabulary, but that's very much. We
call them durable skills now, Tom. They're durable.
Oh, okay, I could take that. Durable skills. I like human skills. Anyway, that's exactly the conversation we're having in medicine.
And what conversation are you having around disinformation and misinformation coming through AI as consumers seek answers?
Well, I guess two things that were already mentioned. One is, and I made a comment about this in the chat, but this is something that's been much discussed in the meeting I'm at here in California. The hallucinations and a lot of the misinformation that emerges depends on the data set you're testing against. And the more specific the data set, the testing data set, the better the outcomes. So that's one issue about where you're going to, how you're sourcing. If you're searching across the web, you're going to get a lot of junk. But if you're sourcing against a well-defined data set, you may get less junk. So that's one issue. And the other issue is around how you ask the questions. Right now, we don't know how to engineer our prompts to get the answers we want, but that's going to evolve very quickly, and we're going to be able to get help from AI exactly how to answer the questions we actually want to answer.
Brady, are you raising your hand?
I wasn't, but mentally I was raising my hand. I had one just interesting and disturbing thought I had read recently, where one of the generative AI models that was being worked on was looking at some emails from the folks that were working on it, where they were discussing shutting down that particular version um, of generative AI and to replace it with another more evolved version. And the model began some self-preservation strategies, trying to it copied itself to another location and began uh, shaping information that made it look like it was performing better than it was, so that it wouldn't be killed. And so I just find that very interesting and sort of disturbing in a way. But I think it sort of highlights this bit of information that we don't entirely know how these large language models work. And I think it's a little bit frightening. I think we're going to do our best to try and protect ourselves from unanticipated consequences, but it sure is something to keep in the back of your mind, that it's a little bit scary if you're doing something that you don't entirely know how it works, especially as they fear when we have AI agents and the agents begin talking to each other and developing their own language. Then all of a sudden we are humans not in the loop, and hijinks could ensue. We'll see.
Thank you, Grady. Is there anybody else on the call who's not currently on our committee who has suggestions for how we might how our committee might be useful to you in helping you perform your particular function within your organization? Are there any topics that you would like to see this committee try to tackle on its quarterly network calls in the future? Tom?
Well, I'm just going to make a suggestion that's come up again and again, because we're all talking about AI, but few of us are actually educated about it. And that includes me. And I think, so all the physicians around the tables I'm sitting at, I'm not a physician, but all the physicians around the table are saying, gosh, we really need to put AI 101 on all of our agendas at every meeting we go to. And I think the same thing may be true for us as public members sitting on these committees, as we're thinking about how to, if we're really going to be transforming the testing industry through the use of these tools, to understand better what the technologies actually do, so that we can make informed decisions about strategically how to employ them.
That's a great idea. We need to assemble a faculty for a presentation of that kind.
Yeah, I kind of put it in the same bucket as, or the same terminology as ecosystem. I mean, I think to Tom's point, we really need an understanding of what AI is out there and what each of those platforms is designed to do, and where it sits and how it's used, to give us a better idea. Because I'm at the same point. I mean, I'm beginning to learn, but I'm only beginning to learn.
Any other thoughts? We have on the call he's still here. Zeno Sassier the second, who is the Public Member Committee's representative on the program committee for I.C.E. And each year, the Public Member Committee submits proposals for sessions to occur at I.C.E. at the Exchange, and we've had considerable success in previous years. Do you want to say anything to this group, Zeno, from the program committee?
Thanks, Becky. This has been another very good meeting. I'll say on behalf of the program committee, and Katie may want to add some things as well. This year we had a record number of submissions, abstract submissions, and we actually had a larger number of sessions than what we usually have as a result of the abundance of abstracts submitted. So I would encourage the public member committee to continue doing what it has done over the past several years in submitting its submissions. I think they are well received by the program committee, and the program committee tries to include several of the sessions in every one of the I.C.E. exchanges. So continue doing what we've done in the past, and hopefully we'll continue to have the same success.
Yeah, and also that we had the largest number of attendees.
We did.
So it was a success all the way around, and public members really added to it, both as attendees and as presenters and proposal submitters.
Mm-hmm.
It was a great conference.
It was excellent.
Hey, Becky, one issue I hope we get a chance to discuss, and I think this is one that's probably in the back of your mind, is if we really are moving towards a more distributed, personalized, workplace embedded system of testing that's more formative and connected to learning, how do we make sure that it's actually also doing the job that it's actually was originally set up to do, which is to identify people who really should not be in practice?
That's very much on my mind, and that's the question I ask repeatedly about longitudinal assessment, which I think is a brilliant improvement in very many ways. But the question is, how do you distinguish between those people who should be and shouldn't be in practice?
Yeah.
How does that system do the summative role? It does the formative role well, but where does the summative come in?
Well, I'll just say we have an answer to that in terms of we can make a cut point, but do we have the will to do it? This isn't really a technical issue, I don't think. And Brett, we should have a conversation about it. It's about whether it's really about the balance you create between wanting to support people to have the skills that they need and needing to identify people who can't get there. Mm-hmm. And that's a tension. It's an inherent tension.
And security begins to rear its ugly head in that a lot as well.
Well, David Foster thinks the security issue is going to be solved by massive data pools of item pools and randomization of content, in which case the security issue goes away. And all the trouble that testing companies do to copyright their IP and manage their data item banks and stuff, he thinks all that stuff's going to disappear.
Yeah.
So Tom,
people that are in the room helping you, though. I mean, that works great against conventional cheating, where you've got copies of items. But...
Well, we should put it on an agenda. I know the time is short, so
let's should we devote our June network call to this topic? I'd be game for that.
Sure. I think it's a.
What does everybody else feel?
I think it's a great topic, but with so many tentacles, if you will, and it fits the credentialing community in some ways against the academic community. You've got the licensing boards at the state level involved. It's a big issue.
I agree, and there's lots of ethical issues too, and it may be related to like intermediate testing before you get to licensure and credentialing stages, because like the ethics of having somebody be in advanced graduate school or medical school for 6 years and then they can't pass the licensing boards afterwards. Is it ethical if you knew that they weren't going to be able to get to that point starting out to get $400,000 in student loans and that type of thing? So there's lots of issues related to competence and then kind of verifying it along the way before we get to the very end that could be helpful too.
That's a really, really good point.
Right. And another measure is, who are we excluding? It's not only a DEI thing, it is a whole issue of, as we think about broadening the team on all our credentialing programs, the question, and our boards, the question we should ask is, who are we excluding? That's kind of the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's a good point.
No, it relates to, Mark. It's like there's two kind of schools of thought. Do we be more open and let more folks in to the training path, even if they don't necessarily have those prerequisite scores earlier on, hopefully that they're going to get up to the speed? Or is it or are we taking advantage of some of them, you know, in that case when they can't get to the high level you need for some of these high really restrictive professions. So
Mhm.
no, but it's a great topic.
So I hate to end the conversation, but we are 3 minutes over. So Becky, do you have any final comments?
Well, just to say thank you to everybody. This was a great presentation, and I can't wait until we have another call to pursue this topic that we're cutting short right now, because this is a fascinating one, I think. So thanks to everyone for participating.
Thanks all.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone. Take care.
Holidays.
Yes.
Bye.